This is the All Elite Wrestling Podcast. It's called All Elite Wrestling Unrestricted, the official podcast of AEW.
You're real excited about this.
I really am.
How you've been stuck at home, so you're probably like real desperate for attention
Yes,
right now.
I'm stuck. I'm real desperate for content. I'm real desperate for contact, human contact. And by the way, Tony Schiavone, Aubrey Edwards,
Hey.
your co-host. And boy, are we excited today. And we always say that, but we really are every time. But I'm really more excited because we're going to be talking to one of my colleagues and a young man who I consider the next generation of announcers in pro wrestling. He's the man, Excalibur. Hey, Excalibur, how are you?
Hey, what's going on?
Hey guys, it's great to be talking with you. We went from speaking almost constantly to never speaking in a matter of a month. So
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
yeah.
I don't think I've seen you in person for like
Salt Lake
5
City?
weeks.
No, Jacksonville.
Salt Lake City.
First
Was it
Jackson.
Jackson? Yeah, the first week in Jacksonville. Yeah, it's been wild.
The first week at the undisclosed location in northern
location,
Florida.
right. Nobody tell Jeff Jones to listen to this. He'll get mad.
Oh, does he still get mad about things like, well,
Jeff Jones gets mad about everything.
everything?
Does the Pope shit in the woods, Tony?
Anyway, hi. So Excalibur, you're incredible commentator for AEW, but a lot of people don't know that you're also commentator and one of the original founders of PWG, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, one of the biggest indie promotions in wrestling.
Yes, I and what people also don't know, and this, somewhat by design, is that I used to be a professional wrestler as well. I wasn't a highly regarded professional wrestler, but I had a lot of friends that were highly regarded professional wrestlers, and so I sort of glommed onto them. And we started Pro Wrestling Guerrilla in 2003, and myself and 5 other guys, just independent wrestlers in Southern California, Super Dragon, Disco Machine, Mr. Excitement, Top Gun Talbor, and Scott Lost and Joey Ryan were the original 6 people that started PWG. And we were just kind of sick of, there was a lot of shady indie promoters back then. This was kind of in the early days of the internet when word didn't travel quite as quickly. And so guys could, rip people off. And we were kind of sick of that, and we saw that we were going out there and kind of busting our asses and having, what we considered to be really great matches. And, they're for promoters that weren't necessarily that thankful for it. And so we just decided, why not do it ourselves? And so we all got a couple bucks together, and we did our first show back in July of 2003. The main event was Frankie Kazarian versus AJ Styles. And,
Damn.
Yeah, and that was kind of where Pro Wrestling Guerrilla all started, and that's also the start of my commentary career as well.
Yeah, so you wrestled for how long before switching to commentary?
I wrestled for about 7 years, from 99 to 2006, and I started doing commentary in 2003 for that first PWG show. I'd done a little bit of commentary before that for some other SoCal promotions, but PWG was really where I got started, and it was out of necessity because those first shows we were charging $15 a ticket, and we had maybe 100 people there. And so when you have Frankie Kazarian and AJ Styles in your main event, there's airfare and pay and all these other things to worry about. We had to pay for the venue, all this stuff, and so we had to release the shows on at the time VHS and DVD.
Oh boy.
And just out of total necessity, I myself and Disco Machine, we did commentary on those shows, and that was kind of where it got rolling. And I've done, I think, every PWG show except for one of them.
What was the one?
I don't remember. I think it might have been one of the European shows.
Ah, interesting.
Who came up with the name Pro Wrestling Guerrilla?
I think it was me, but it was, this was 17 years ago.
Take the credit. It's fine. No one remembers.
I say that because it's a cool name.
Well, so it actually started out as a joke because there was a promoter in Southern California that he was to use the inside baseball term, a money mark, and he said that indie wrestling is pro wrestling at its most guerrilla, and we all kind of laughed at that because he just kind of came in with his checkbook and that, and so.
Sure.
it was a name that amused us, but then I also really liked to be able to use the pun of having a gorilla as our mascot. So that was
right.
It served two masters.
Right. I get that. So tell us about how the mask came into being for you. What's the significance of the mask?
Well, I was into wrestling as a kid, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, those kind of stuff, Ultimate Warrior. And then in the early 90s, I got out of it. I'm not sure what it was, but that just kind of, I guess just part of growing up. Your friends are into different things. I started getting into basketball. But then in about 96, a friend of mine showed me a copy of the WCW When Worlds Collide. And the pay-per-view with, it had, what was the match? It was Negro Casas and Octagon versus Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero. And,
wow.
It was just, it was like basically like a kind of a WCW versus AAA pay-per-view. And I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And right around that time, Nitro was about to start. I think the Pillman and Liger match had happened. The first one happened, like a year or so before that. I saw that on videotape, and I became enthralled with Japanese wrestling. And, because I loved the aesthetics of lucha libre, but the athleticism of the Japanese style. And then when I discovered the Japanese junior heavyweight style, that was kind of pioneered by Gran Hamada with UWF, which would then turn out guys like Great Sasuke, Ultimo Dragon, all those guys started in Hamada's UWF in Japan, and that kind of was the precursor for Michinoku Pro, which is that was also right around the same time that Liger and all those guys in New Japan were kind of pioneering that junior heavyweight style, and that was something that I really found myself drawn toward. And so I was always a big fan of superhero comics growing up. And so to be able to have a kind of masked superhero persona, but with actual in-ring superheroic feats of athleticism, that checked both of those boxes for me. And that kind of drew me in. And so the guy that I was most drawn to at that time was Great Sasuke. And so my mask is kind of a homage to his style. I've got the, like the tassels, the black mask with the white faceplate, but then also like the crest on the top of the mask is an homage to Black Bolt from the Immortals and Marvel Comics. And so,
that's awesome.
It's kind of marrying both of those two passions of mine as a younger person together. And, here I am all these 25 plus years later, still wearing this mask and sweating constantly.
Yes, and it's got to be tough to see through as well.
It is,
to read a format.
Luckily, when we're doing our show, I've got a monitor about arm's length from me. But when I'm doing PWG shows, I've got the lights in my face, the screen's on the mask, and so I'm kind of just seeing shapes that are moving and giving my best guess of what they're doing. And and I'd say I got 95% accuracy on that.
95 is still really good when you're blind.
Yeah, right. I love PWG became kind of an in thing to do in Southern California. Talk about how that all developed.
We started out, we were really inspired. There was a tournament in 2001 called the King of Indies. All Pro Wrestling in San Francisco put it on. And it was basically the American independent version of the Super J Cup tournament. And we saw that, and we saw all these guys come together, have these great matches over the course of a weekend. I said, wouldn't that be cool if we were able to do that? And so that was kind of the first mission statement, I guess, of PWG, was to just get all the best indie guys from, not only Southern California, but around the country, get them together and just put on great shows. And it took a couple years of us doing that before we really got noticed. And I think the thing that did get us noticed was, on a global scale, was we had the Battle of Los Angeles tournament. And I believe it was 2006 was the first time that the Dragon Gate guys came over from Japan. And after that, after they got to wrestle with a lot of the North American indie guys, they said, hey, you guys are pretty good. Would you like to come over to Japan for a tour? And so that was when Kevin Steen, El Generico, Chris Bosch, and I believe B-Boy maybe all went over for Dragon Gate. And from then it became, within the American indie community, it was like, oh, this is a way to get booked in Japan if I can get on PWG. And so it all kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, because to me, when I started watching indie wrestling, I've seen all these guys and there's the same shitty room in Reseda, California that became like synonymous with like, these are the next big names in wrestling. Like PWG is essentially like, when you've made it to PWG, you've made it in indie wrestling. That's how kind of I always saw it. And I don't know if you kind of ever saw it that way or like even understood like what it meant to be running a promotion that was that highly regarded.
When you're so inside of it, you kind of fail to notice what the outside perception is. And so there was a time when Desmond Xavier, when he first came to PWG, we were still in Reseda, and it had rained for, I don't know, about 3 weeks in Southern California, which in Southern California, that's a big deal. And the the roof of the Legion Hall in Reseda was leaking. The whole building smelled like mildew. It was in its worst state that it had ever been in. And Des walks in and he's just wide eyed and he comes in and he just gasps. He's like, I can't believe I'm finally here. And I'm like, in this dump? Like, you're going to get black mold, like you're going to get black lung just by being in here. It's like, I don't care. It's awesome. And, it's like when people had that kind of reaction coming into the building, that was when I kind of felt that, we had something really special. And, like I talked about the Dragon Gate guys coming over, the kind of second wave of that was in, I believe, 2012 was the first time that Steve Regal came to a Battle of Los Angeles tournament. And shortly after that, I mean, you could just see every year that he would come out to Battle of Los Angeles, there would be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 guys that shortly thereafter would get signed to NXT. And so that also kind of is what gave PWG the reputation of, being the place to be found.
Right, to be found. But there was more than just that, Excalibur. Celebrities came too, right? And it was a big deal for celebrities to get in and have their picture taken. I was told at the ringside that they were there. I mean, it was a big deal, right?
Yeah. It was, the great thing about Pro Wrestling Guerrilla is that it was kept intentionally small, and it still is. There's a finite amount of tickets. There's no real preferential treatment to, if a celebrity emails us and asks and says, hey, can I get a ticket? The answer is more often than not no. And
here's the ticket link.
Yeah. And so that was kind of what made it really, really sought after in some circles. And the first celebrity that we really had come to the show was this guy named Chris Bauer, who is an actor that's been on many of the David Simon HBO shows. He's been on The Wire. He's been on, the one that was just, the one that just ended, about New York in the 70s.
Hunters.
No. I know that's your favorite show.
Yeah, I know.
No, but and so he was on a show called True Blood on HBO, and so he would come and he would bring some of his friends from the show. He would tell them about it, and then for the wrap party for True Blood, his gift to the cast was that he bought out an entire section at one of our shows, and so Joe Manganiello was on True Blood, and that's when he first started dating Sofia Vergara. And that's when she came and got her picture taken with, that was when we had like a big angle with the Young Bucks, Roderick Strong, Adam Cole, and Super Dragon laying waste to the entire roster. And so Sofia Vergara has this selfie where she's like posing next to the ring. And she says like, I think they're dead. And I am the corpse laying immediately behind her. That was my big claim to fame for the longest time. But around that time, we had musicians come. Billy Corrigan, before he got involved in wrestling, came to check us out. Adam Jones from Tool was always a big supporter of ours, and he would bring other musicians. One of the biggest things for me was Mike Patton from Faith No More, Tomahawk, Mr. Bungle, all those great bands. He came to one of our shows, and the great thing about the PWG audience is that they're there to see the wrestling. They're not there to see the celebrities. And so, a couple people will go up and say hi and just, talk to people. But for the most part, are very respectful and just really cool about, having a good familial atmosphere that we're all here to see the wrestling. Just who happens to be here is kind of secondary.
I think my favorite part at like a weird thing that happened at Battle of Los Angeles this last year is the first day there was Mara Wilson in the crowd who did Matilda. And like, I didn't know it, but then Jeff Cobb comes downstairs. He's like, dude, Matilda's in the crowd. And he like has this look on his face like he just woke up and it's Christmas. And he's like, I used to watch that movie all the time. And then you see like Brody King come by like, wait, Matilda's here? And they're apparently like both the biggest Matilda marks. So like during intermission, there's guys like sitting next to the wrestlers and taking pictures. And then Jeff Cobb's like, hey, Matilda, can I get a picture? And it's just so funny seeing these like big, scary, giant guys asking this like girl who's just there to watch wrestling. And she's like, yeah, sure, I guess. Like it was just a very, very funny picture, but awesome at the same time. Fun story.
All right. We want to talk to Excalibur about his transition from a wrestler to an announcer and how that has blossomed into a great career for him. And also want to talk about his fandom as well.
This is AEW Unrestricted. Today we've got Excalibur. We've been talking a little bit about PWG, about his time as a wrestler, what got him into wrestling, all these awesome things. But eventually, you'd started announcing for PWG back at the first show, and then eventually turned into announcing full-time. What was sort of the transition there?
My in-ring career came to an end, and that was pretty much it. It was, a combination of injuries and I guess, kind of lack of motivation on my part. I felt like PWG was getting to a certain point where, the level of wrestling on our shows was so high that I felt for, a variety of reasons that I couldn't really keep up with that level of wrestling, and mostly due to, my knees were bad, my back was bad. I'd had a couple of concussions that I was pretty worried about. And I knew that by being part of, the management of PWG, I could give myself a spot on the show if I wanted to. But right. I felt like that would have been unfair to the guys that were, either the local Southern California guys or the guys coming from around the country that were really trying to make a career in professional wrestling. I knew that being a pro wrestler was not going to be my long-term career. And so for me to take a spot away from somebody else that did have those aspirations, that felt to be a little selfish on my part. And so, it was a variety of factors, but that's what ended up leading to me, hanging up the trunks, but not the mask. And so, as I transitioned to outside of the ring role, I was the commissioner of food and beverage for a long time, the figurehead as well as the announcer. And so, it was convenient to have, a figurehead mouthpiece person for us. If, if a guy missed his flight or his flight got canceled or something, or we had to shuffle around the card, we didn't really have anybody that could announce that. And so for me to be in that position, that was helpful, but, for my primary focus was the announcing. And that was, around the time that I started to take it a little more seriously, as I noticed that, guys were going places based on what PWG was doing. And so I felt it incumbent upon me to do a better job as an announcer if these guys are going out there busting their ass in the ring for us.
And you just chose to keep the mask because you had been wearing it the whole time, or was there another reason for that?
Yeah, that was, Excalibur is the only thing I've ever been in professional wrestling. And, even though it was on a very, very low level that, to this day, people still don't understand why I wear the mask. It's the only persona I've ever done in professional wrestling. And for me, there is, kind of that separation. When I put on the mask, this is wrestling. When I take off the mask, this is everything else in my life.
That's true. It's a really good point.
Starting PWG, wrestling, and then moving into the announcing side of it. Obviously, you loved wrestling growing up. Talk about your fandom. Talk about how you started, when you first started loving professional wrestling, when that started, and how it continued up until your professional career started.
Well, I touched on it a little bit before, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, those were my guys when I was a kid. And growing up in Detroit, having WrestleMania 3 in Detroit, that was a big kind of touchstone for everybody that, when I was in school, everybody was talking about it for, the right. weeks leading up to it. And then the weeks after it, it's like, the kids that got to go to WrestleMania, they were the lucky ones. The rest of us, either have to watch it on, a closed circuit or wait for the home video release. And I grew up in the 80s, and Detroit historically is a big wrestling city, and so those combinations of factors led to just me being interested in it. And I mentioned, as I guess in the early 90s, maybe 93, I kind of fell out of it, but there was that ember burning, in the back of my mind, that all it took was just like a little bit of kindling, and that little bit of kindling was that, seeing the Lucha Libre style and seeing these guys in masks flying around, and that just, reignited everything, and then turned it into a huge passion of mine to the point where I remember when I got my first car on my lunch break in high school, I would actually drive to a Japanese video store that was, I think they were only open till like 5 p.m. and it was about 25 minutes away. And so I would drive there, I'd run over to the sports section. I learned what, pro wrestling looked like in Japanese. I would just go and I'd grab every tape off the shelf. I would rent it, and then I'd, go home and I would record, I'd dub all the tapes. Then the next day, bring them back, and I'd ask them, like, when are you getting more? And they'd be like, I'm not getting more till next week. And I'd be like, okay. And then I'd come back the next week, and I would do that. And so I really became fanatical about it, to the point where my dad said, if you spent 1/10 of the energy you do on pro wrestling on your schoolwork, you'd be a straight A student.
So your dad is not too cool on wrestling? Is that what you're saying?
He's come around to it. He watches Dynamite every week. He's got sartorial criticisms for me, about my suit, about my tie, everything. He watches Dark. He watches all the stuff, and he's come around to it now. But the thing that kind of caused a rift between my dad and I was that I left Detroit in 1999 to move all the way to Los Angeles with $2,000 in my pocket. And it was to pursue my passion of pro wrestling. And, so I quit school. I did that. And he's like, this is a terrible idea. I don't like this. I don't agree with this. And so things were rough between us for a couple of years. But then after I was in LA for a while, and I'd kind of, set up my own life out there. And, I give myself this pat on the back. I never asked him for a handout. I never asked him for money. I kind of did it all on my own. And I think he respected that. And after a while, I think after I retired and I was retired from wrestling, but was still involved in PWG on the other aspects of it, he came around to it. He saw that there was, he could Google it and find stuff about it and find that it was not just this insignificant little organization out there, that there were people around the world talking about it. And so over time, he, began to, he began to come around, and now he's, I'd like to think that he would watch Dynamite without me, but I think I'm a big part of it. But actually, on the last couple of weeks, Tony, where it's only been you, he's like, hey, Tony and Jericho are doing a pretty good job. Are you worried? Oh. I'm like, hey, Dad, go F yourself.
No, geez. Did you ask him if he's watching the post show?
He did watch the post show last week. He's asking me about, he's like, hey, Taz and JR like Ozark. How come you haven't watched it yet?
Wow. Yeah, how come you haven't watched it yet?
Because I don't have my AARP card, Tony.
Hey-o.
Tell your dad that we are all a team, okay? And the only reason Jericho and I are doing all the shows now is because of the virus.
I know. And he was actually very thankful. Aubrey, there, when we're at shows, I will routinely iron my own shirt and jacket and stuff. And every time I'm doing that, Sandra has a billion other things to be doing instead of ironing my clothes.
She's got a lot.
And every time I do that, Tony walks by and he'll be like, your parents raised you right. And and I told my dad that because, when I was watching Nitro, I was still at his house. I'd be watching Nitro and it would be on and he would see it. So of course he knows who Tony Schiavone is. And so I'd be like, Dad, Tony Schiavone told me you did a good job raising me. And he's like, that means a lot. So
yeah, well, good.
That's awesome.
Good. You, as an announcer, and of course we're going to be talking about your transition to AEW, but you as an announcer, and here's a little behind the scenes thing as well. When I found out that I was going to be doing one with Cody and Kenny Omega, the first one by myself, which is kind of the first play-by-play, I was really nervous. And I don't get nervous. Never been nervous. I don't know if nervous is the right word. It's concern. And I sent you a text, and I said, you need to help me out with naming these moves because you're so good at it. And I just want to make sure. Good. I'm just going to make sure that I'm on top of things. And I found out quickly, I'm not. But how did you learn all this? Just studying and watching tapes and just by doing it? It's absolutely amazing. I mean, everything, it used to not be, Excalibur, as you know, it used to not be that everything had a name. but it seems like everything's got a name now, and most of the names work out quite well.
Yeah, like I said, during my high school days when I was dedicating a lot of time to wrestling, I was watching the Japanese tapes, and after a while I figured out it's like, oh, they're actually saying English words just kind of like in accent to Japanese, and I would start to break down what those words were. And the other thing that really kind of pushed me in that wrestling nerd direction was there was this game that came out for Sega Saturn called Fire Pro Wrestling S 6-Man Scramble. And there's this legendary series of video games called Fire Pro Wrestling, which started out on the Super Nintendo and then kind of went through different iterations. But this was the first one that came out during the early internet age. And I was super, super into this game and actually helped work on the FAQ, like the translation, the fan translation of this game. And so that really provided me like the foundation of knowledge of wrestling moves, is because I would, I'd be working with people that were translating and this is all fan driven stuff. And we'd all be working on translations together. This was way before Google Translate. If you had like a Japanese friend, you would ask them or their parents or something to translate one specific phrase or move or thing like that. And that's, through working on that type of project, that's what provided me this foundational knowledge. And then just throughout the years of watching wrestling and building upon it, and just, I don't know, making mental notes about what things are calling. And, having been involved in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla for so long, the first Kenny Omega match I called was in 2007 or 2008. And so I've been very closely, monitoring his in-ring career and, making mental notes about these moves. Or, he'd be like, hey, I'm going to do, I've got this finisher that I'm calling this. And so, I've got this bank, this long-running bank of knowledge where, Tony, I think the first Kenny Omega match you called was probably in 2019.
Yes.
And so, if I had to call, Gwyneth Striper's game, I might not have the ERA at hand, whereas you might have that just, rummaging around in the back of your head. You might have that.
Right. Sure. I get it. Some of these names of these moves that we hear you say, and they throw off the tongue so easily, so effortlessly. Did you come up with some of these names?
Not unless somebody specifically asked me, what should I call this? Everything that not everything, but, I'd say 99% of the things that I call have been called that somewhere else, either by the guy that came up with it, like Kenny Omega's finisher, the One-Winged Angel, that's the move that he named. But, Tope Suicida, that is my favorite. The Spanish translation of, suicide dive. And, then there's Tope con Hiro, which is mistranslated to Japanese as Tope con Hilo, because Japanese people sometimes will transpose L's and R's. But Tope con Hiro is a dive with a flip or with a rotation or a gyro, think about it. And so a lot of it is just my wrestling Spanish is much more proficient than my day-to-day conversational Spanish.
Well, it's remarkable.
Thank you.
Is there anyone that's asked you to name their moves?
Yeah. A lot of times, guys will come up to me like, hey, I got an idea for a thing. So, if you see me do it, just name it something cool. And I'll be like, you're not giving me a lot of notice here. Actually during Pac and Omega at All Out, Tony Khan, one of the few times that he got in my ear and he's like, hey, think of a name for Pac's finisher. And this was 30 seconds before it happened.
Oh, God. No pressure.
Yeah. And so I just blurted out Brutalizer. So that was one that I named. But,
very good.
Thank you. But it was just on the spot and something that I had to come up with.
Well, I got one more for you. The first day that I had to do the commentary alone when we were in Jacksonville, Sammy Guevara was going to win a match, and I said, "What's the name of your finish called?" He said, "I don't know. I haven't come up with a name."
Oh my God, I remember that.
I haven't come up with a name yet. I went, "Okay." I said, "You need to call Excalibur." So maybe you'll have to name another one. We'll see. Anyway, We're talking with Excalibur, and next we're going to hear about Excalibur's transition to work for All Elite Wrestling.
We're here, AEW Unrestricted, official podcast of AEW, talking to Excalibur. I'm Aubrey Edwards. We've got Tony Schiavone. Talked a little bit about time on the indies, starting PWG, going from wrestling to announcing. Lots of fun stuff, how you got into wrestling. But now you're here, AEW, a very integral part of AEW day-to-day, Wednesdays, announce team, all these things. How did that all start? Like, when was the first time you heard about AEW?
Well, it kind of, the impetus for this was All In, and in September of 2018, and the Bucks were putting together the show along with Cody and Kenny, and they asked me to be a part of the announce team, and that was the first time that I had ever done anything on pay-per-view, anything that was actually broadcast around. I guess I've done live stream stuff, but like that level of something. And
big.
It was the first time I'd ever worked with Don Callis and Ian Riccaboni, and I think for just sitting, meeting that afternoon, sitting down and calling a show together, I think we did really well. And after the show was over, Matt Jackson came up to me and he said, "Hey, we've got something in the works. Just keep your ears open. We'll be in touch." And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." And I had no idea what was really happening. And then I saw them a month or so later, and they were like, "Hey, things are happening. We're really working on something here. Just kind of keep an open mind." And then January 1st, 2019, the big announcement on Being the Elite, AEW is formed, and I said, "Oh wow, this is actually happening, and it seems to be happening in a very big way." And so they asked me to do the ticket on sale press conference in Las Vegas in February, and they said, "Hey, how would you feel about announcing the show?" And I said, "I'd love it." And they said, "How would you feel about announcing the show with Jim Ross?" And I said, "You're absolutely out of your minds. That will never happen in a million years." And they said, "Yes, this is the team." And so I said, "Yes, I'd love to do that." And so they, along with Alex Marvez, they flew us to Atlanta, and we did some chemistry tests with JR. And at first he was very skeptical. He saw me in the mask, and he said, "What the hell is this? Why
exactly?
Yeah, why are you doing this? The announcer's job is to put over the product in the ring and not themselves." And I said, "JR, I know, and I hope that I can earn your trust, and I hope you can see the job that I do is all about promoting the in-ring product." And he said, we'll see." And so we called a few hours of matches that were on tape. And initially he said, "I'm going to do lead play-by-play. Excalibur, you do analysis. Marvez, you do you do color, like statistics or whatever." And he said, "Okay." And then slowly after we'd done a couple matches, things started shifting to me going into the more play-by-play role, JR doing some color, Marvez doing the analysis or statistics and things like that. And depending on the type of match, we would kind of shift roles back and forth. And I think that's ultimately the formula that we've adopted for AEW, is that on certain types of matches that are more traditional style pro wrestling, JR takes the lead. And on matches that are more, fast paced, I guess, 2010s, or in this case, 2020s professional wrestling style, I'll take the lead on that. And it's not something that, Tony, and you can attest to this, that we've ever discussed. It's just something that's kind of happened organically.
That's cool.
JR mentioned one time that one of the fans, I guess it was on Twitter, said, "Why do you let Excalibur do play-by-play, JR?" JR says, "Because he's good at it." And so that's how we work as a team. Excalibur takes the lead, JR takes the lead, and I say, "You're right, Excalibur. You're right, JR." And run away with a paycheck, basically. And
it's okay. Tony just rides everyone's coattails.
Listen, I like that, buddy.
Tony,
I like that.
Tony Schiavone is the highest paid member per syllable of the AEW announce team.
That's exactly right.
I heard that once. I was like, how do I get that deal?
No, I think it was after I think it was actually after Fight for the Fallen in Jacksonville last July. JR paid a very, very big compliment to me, which I was very surprised by and still very memorable. He said, "You know why I like working with you? Because it's a night off for me."
Oh. JR is one of the most like honest people. And I absolutely love that about him. He's just like, oh yeah, here's how it is.
Yeah. But you know, to have him say that and, you know, to know that, you know, despite his early skepticism that, you know, then over the course of 3 shows, he had kind of come to trust my
right. It was literally our 3rd show.
And knowledge. And then, you know, when we took that break over Christmas and came back January 1st, it felt very good to sit down with JR and Tony and just to be back in the saddle. And, you know, like that 1 week break, I don't think any of us felt like we missed a beat. And just because we're all very good at the type of commentary that we do. And so if JR does JR stuff, Excalibur does Excalibur stuff, and Tony does Tony stuff, we're going to be just fine.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all that. I really think that on a personal note, I just think working with JR again for me is a big treat because we hadn't done it since really the early 90s. And being able to work with you and actually learning a lot from you has made it a great broadcast as well. So
yeah, I mean, you know, for me as well, it's JR and more specifically Tony, because I was always a Nitro guy, are, you know, the voices of, you know, those formative wrestling years for me. And so I would always watch Nitro live and Raw on tape. And so, you know, as cool as it is to get to work with JR, it was almost a bigger thrill to be able to work with Tony. So it's this has been very special and very rewarding for me, and I can't wait until we get back to it.
You guys are adorable. This is great.
And we always put over the referees too.
That's true.
Shut up. You do. It's actually like, that's one of the things I really like about our announce team is they're invested in literally every single talent that's in the ring.
Sure. You got to be.
The other thing I try to do too is, I mean, it's not just, you know, mentioning the referee by name, but also giving the referees something of personalities. Like, you know, we have our multi-man match specialist in Rick Knox. You know, our title match specialist is either Aubrey or Paul Turner. You know, I mean, there's different referees fit different roles. And if you think about, you know, basketball or football, you have, you know, like the sideline official, the lead official, these things. And so, of course, it makes sense for the referee corps in AEW to have different specialties.
I mean, it gives it kind of that more sports-like product, right? Like a fight in MMA might be stopped earlier by one ref than it would another. It's like the ref has as much impact on the finish as anything else. So it's kind of nice that like you guys recognize that and actually help, because it's like we're all building the product together. So
you're doing the AEW post show with JR and Taz now during this very extraordinary time for all of us. How you liking that?
It's great. I mean, obviously it'd be better if we were all sitting in the same room together, but you know, it's like, I mean, just like this is, it's a chance for me to talk to my friends who I haven't seen in a long time. Sure. And so in that instance, it's great, you know, having Taz and JR. And for me, it's kind of a different role too, because, you know, I talked on other interviews or podcasts about how much I've learned from JR and Tony, and how it's, you know, because I can do play-by-play for a fast-paced wrestling match in my sleep, but throwing to break or doing a live read for, you know, upcoming ticket sales or something, these are things that I've never had to worry about in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, but they're things that JR and Tony can do in their sleep. And so I've learned a lot about that aspect of the job from them. And, you know, doing the post show with JR and Taz, it's given me a whole other thing where I'm almost kind of like the host of the show, and I'm just teeing those guys up for questions. And so that's been really interesting and really fun, because, you know, I'll have my thoughts about, you know, something that we saw on Dynamite, but I can ask JR and then I can ask Taz, what were your thoughts about it? And then we can see how they all line up together. And, you know, sometimes we all have the same thought, but then other times we see it from completely different perspectives. And it's been really cool and really rewarding.
What's been your favorite match to call at AEW so far?
It's tough. Or do
you have any that are like specifically memorable?
Yeah, the Bucks Lucha Bros ladder match, that was kind of the culmination of the Young Bucks that, I began calling them, and, I first met them in 2004. I first met Matt, and then first started calling them in 2006, I think. And so to see that match be kind of like the culmination of their indie career, it had now led to this point. And I know they had gone to New Japan, they'd done stuff there, and that's great. But, there's something that felt very special about them wrestling the Lucha Brothers in a ladder match, because that same type of match could have happened in PWG. Like if the Young Bucks wrestled Rocky Romero and Ryusuke Taguchi, that wouldn't necessarily feel like a PWG match, but them wrestling the Lucha Bros in a ladder match felt very PWG to me. And so that was special. And then another match that was really special was when Scorpio Sky wrestled Chris Jericho, because Sky is another guy that I've known for 18 years. And I was there from the very first stages of his career when he first started training in Southern California. And then to see him wrestle a main event match on, national television against one of the best in the world was so, it was just so fulfilling to me. And that's PWG was never about being the biggest promotion in the world. It started out as being like a place for us to do cool wrestling. And then it kind of transformed over the years into a place where this is kind of like a way station. This is where you stop before you go out into the bigger world and onto the bigger thing. And so, seeing so many guys, whether they're in WWE or AEW or Japan or wherever, that have gone through PWG, that's very rewarding. And then to be able to call one of those matches with our then at the time world champion Chris Jericho, a guy that I have an immense level of fandom for, and Scorpio Sky, a guy that I've known for nearly 20 years, that was so rewarding and so meaningful for me.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, good stuff. What about the Dusty Cody match, or the Dustin Cody match during Double or Nothing?
That was very emotional, just because it was two brothers beating the shit out of each other,
Sure,
and there was so much, obviously history between the two brothers, but so much history in terms of what Dusty had done for pro wrestling, and right. For his two sons to be blazing their own trail here in AEW, much like he was able to do in the South and Florida and everywhere. That was so rewarding. But that was a match where I let JR take the lead on it, and not that I let him. JR would have taken the lead no matter what.
I got that.
Let's be real.
But I knew just instinctually that this is a JR match. This needs the JR touch of storytelling. And so that was really special, because to be able to sit there for such a great match between Dustin and Cody, and B, such a great call. I mean, literally a masterclass from JR in how to call that type of wrestling match. And I got to sit there, elbow to elbow with him. That was an unbelievable experience. And that was on the very first AEW show.
Yeah, setting the bar kind of high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're in the era where you did a little bit of it, calling matches without an audience, and you've seen matches without an audience. What's your reaction to all this?
It's tough because there's so many times where as broadcasters we'll lay out for the swell of the crowd, or things like that, and without that it's a lot of silence, and that's a little tough, because it requires. It requires a shift in your instincts, because as when you hear the crowd starting to get ready to erupt, you want to lay out and you want to let them be heard. But without that, you kind of have to fill that space, and there is a time and place for silences. But I think we end up speaking more on these empty arena shows than we would on an average Dynamite broadcast. And for the past few years at Pro Wrestling Girl, I've called things by myself, and so I have nobody to play off of. And one of the things that JR has chided me on is that we don't get paid by the word, kid. And so
unless you're Tony Schiavone,
right?
Then you get paid by the syllable.
But so in these empty arena matches, I think having my more verbose tendencies of speaking more does kind of help, because then you can kind of fill in those what would be silences.
One thing with Tony Khan, he is, as you know, Excalibur, he is not, although he can be in our ear and has been in our ear at times, he's not one to overcoach us or overdrive us. He lets us do our thing, which certainly we all appreciate. But during these, I found out during the last couple of weeks, during the empty arena matches, he kind of stays on me, coaches me, and tells us, we have no fans, so you're going to need to talk a lot more. And so he lets us know that. So, yeah, it's a change. So, listen, during this time where no one can get out and or should get out, what is your binge watching recommendations during hashtag stay home?
I've been watching Westworld on HBO.
Wrestling tapes?
No.
Okay. No, what? I'm sorry. What are you watching?
Watching Westworld on HBO. I've been watching Better Call Saul, which is phenomenal. Getting through season 2 of Narcos Mexico. And actually, for a little known show that everybody should watch, and I hopefully our Turner Media or Warner Media family will be very happy in me promoting, but I am promoting through no duress. There's no gun off camera pointed to my head. This is one of the best comedy shows of the last probably 10 years. There's 2 seasons of it. The episodes are 10 to 15 minutes each, and it is perfect in every way. It's on Adult Swim. It's called Joe Pera Talks With You.
Ooh,
and
I'm sold.
It's so easily digestible, so funny, so wholesome. It is so great, and I cannot give enough love to that show. Joe Pera Talks With You.
Joe Pera Talks With You. We'll write it down, as a matter of fact.
Writing it down, making a note.
Yeah. Hey, so whatever happened to your extensive wrestling collection? All the dubs you made?
It is still in my dad's basement. Every time I go for a visit, he'll ask me, he's like, hey, can I get rid of these? And I was like, maybe just hold on to them for a little longer. And I hope he doesn't throw them out, but I have not had a VCR plugged into my television in probably 18 years. And so if he did throw them out, he could replace them all with blank tapes or just empty boxes, and I probably wouldn't even know.
Well, I tell you, Dad's got to be really proud of you. He really does, because you've done a phenomenal job. Even though he can tell people, that's my son, they say, how do you know he's got a mask on? He can still say that to everybody out there. And he has to be proud of it. It's a great story.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I'll have you know, Tony, that he wears a mask to the golf course.
As well he should. As well he should, in honor of his son. Excalibur, thanks a lot, buddy. Always great talking to you.
Thanks so much for being here, dude.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Aubrey. A really great pleasure to be here. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Excalibur. Don't forget, Aubrey.
What? Huh?
Subscribe to what?
Subscribe to AEW Unrestricted. I think you can get it for free.
That's right, wherever you get your podcasts.
We're free wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We got new audio episodes every Thursday morning, the day after AEW Dynamite is on TV, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central on TNT. I'm Aubrey Edwards.
I'm Tony Schiavone.
Down here in that frame, or that frame, depending on how this is recorded. But yeah, this is AEW Unrestricted. Thanks again for listening. Thank you, Excalibur. This has been awesome.
Thanks, guys.